Hi and welcome back. In this lecture we will cover the next collaborative elicitation technique called workshops. Like always, let's have a look at the definition of a workshop. There isn't simply one correct definition, but the one I found to be the most accurate goes as follows. A workshop is a meeting where a group of people engage in intensive discussions and activity on a particular subject or project. When breaking down the definition, we can identify some of a workshop's characteristics. The first characteristic is about the words a group of people. Unlike brainstorming, you always need multiple people to do a workshop. You can't really do a workshop by yourself. Who you want to invite mainly depends on the topic of your workshop. You do not necessarily need diversity, but rather expertise. So you want to invite the people with the right set of skills and knowledge to have in-depth discussions. For instance, I did workshops with only IT developers, and that's completely okay, as the goal was not to generate many ideas to solve a problem, but to discuss, say, the technology we would like to use to build in-app sales flows. The next characteristics we can distinguish in the definition is about the project or the subject. This part of the definition refers to the scope of workshops as a whole. You can virtually conduct workshops for any type of topic where you need input from multiple people. However, for generating many ideas, the brainstorming technique would be a better choice. There is not really a standardized type of workshop, but there are some workshops that are more relevant for business analysts than others. You have the formal requirements workshop. This workshop typically is highly structured and quite formal, as it also serves as a validation moment for requirements. During this workshop, you define, create, refine, and reach closure on business requirements. The group of stakeholders is carefully selected and depends on the requirements that are tackled in the workshop. Another type of workshop is the business process improvement workshop. This one is rather semi-formal. During this workshop, you analyze existing business processes and you try to identify possible improvements for that process. And the last one is the Agile Requirement Workshop. This one is usually more unstructured and informal. In this workshop, you go over the requirements with the product owner and the development team. Based on your requirements, the product owner will create user stories and put it in his or her product backlog. That was the definition. Now, when would it be appropriate to use a workshop? You might have noticed that there are quite a few similarities between workshops and brainstorms. However, they are used for completely different reasons. To put it simply, where brainstorms are used to generate many ideas to solve a problem in a creative way, workshops are used for everything else that involves a group of people. If you want to create a better way of working between departments, do a workshop. If you want to define new objectives for your product, do a workshop. If you want to build a screen flow for selling a product and want to make sure that everything is correct from a legal perspective, you guessed it, do a workshop. You want to do a cost-benefit analysis around two IT components, do a workshop. So I hope that with all these examples, you understand that the scope of workshops is actually much broader than brainstorming sessions. How would I execute a workshop? Well, given that there is not a single type of workshop, I kind of adapt the execution of said workshop in a way to best match the situation. But there are some parts that should always be done, so let's go over them. I will go over the steps I would take to give a requirements workshop, as this is the most formal one. First, we start with the usual suspect, the preparation phase. The main preparation that needs to happen prior to the meeting is to have a clear definition of the as-is and the to-be situation. What needs are we trying to solve today, and how does the ideal situation look in the future? You should aim to have these two analysis deliverables prior to the meeting and share it with the stakeholders to fuel the workshop. This can typically be done by creating a concept report, but this falls outside the scope of this course. So the preparation phase can take quite a while if you take those aspects into consideration. Now, who should you invite to the workshop? Expertise is the main driver behind choosing the right participants. So if your problem looks like a nail, invite people with hammers. It can be an idea to hold multiple workshops, one for each type of requirement. So you could set up a workshop with legal to create the legal requirements and have a separate workshop with data analysts to create the data requirements, for instance. Next, you need to ask yourself, what is the maximum amount of people you should invite? Like for brainstorming sessions, I would try to limit the maximum amount of people to 8 or 10. As mentioned, you can split the workshops by business unit and type of requirements. As to where the workshop can happen, it's a group discussion, so a simple meeting room should do the trick. The next phase you have to consider is the introduction. This phase should take about 15 minutes. Like always, introduce yourself and let everyone around the table introduce themselves. Then you go over the problem statement and explain the main findings of your concept report. Next, we arrive at the content phase of the workshop. To create requirements, there are many types of techniques. One that I like to use is the customer journey mapping. It's a technique that is often used in an agile environment. It helps to build solutions that are very user-oriented, and it helps to prioritize requirements to build the right minimum viable product. This technique definitely deserves a lesson on its own, so I will go over it quite quickly. In the first part of the journey mapping exercise, you define the main activities that the user tries to do. This is the backbone of your customer journey. Then you define within each activity the different user tasks that the user has to execute. Next, you draw a line, a horizontal line, which separates what user tasks should be done to reach the activity and which are not actually needed. What's above the line is required for the solution to function, and what's under the line can be done at a later stage. This helps to prioritize and create the MVP of your solution. Let's use a practical example to better illustrate this technique. Imagine your morning routine when going to work. The main activities are waking up, taking care of your hygiene, dressing up, eating, and traveling to work. Within each activity, you have a myriad of tasks. Under hygiene, for instance, you have showering, brushing your teeth, putting on perfume, etc. If you were to run late, can you think of certain user tasks that you might want to skip? Well, for me, for instance, I would skip the perfume part. However, I would keep the brushing teeth task as I consider it to be an absolute must. Skipping breakfast could also be an option. What I try to illustrate with this example is that you have to see the user tasks as requirements. When defining the first increment of your product, you really have to think whether or not you need this requirement from the start. But as I said, this falls outside the scope of this course and deserves a lecture on its own. After the content phase, we can now move on to the conclusion phase. In here, you summarize what you learned, go through the next steps and action points, organize a second workshop if needed, and of course, thank the participants for their time. This typically takes between 5 to 10 minutes. After the workshop, you go through the customer journey mapping exercise and create a digital version of it. And finally, you send out meeting minutes to the participants and other stakeholders that are interested in the results of the exercise. This typically takes 30 minutes. As always, let's discuss the pros and cons of workshops. The good news goes first. There is a greater chance of obtaining consensus because issues and questions are asked directly during the meeting. You can quickly check the accuracy of the requirements with participants. It allows to successfully gather requirements from a large group in a short period of time. The documentation is completed within hours of the session and shared with the participants for review and/or approval. And finally, the scope of the workshop uses is very broad and flexible. Now, going on to the bad news. It can be difficult to get all relevant stakeholders in one room at the same time. Big workshops can be complex to organize and pose logistical issues. Success of a session is also highly dependent on the expertise of the facilitator. It can be expensive, especially if there is more than one workshop. And to finish, the preparation can be quite time-consuming, especially if you need to build a whole concept report. What are some of the best practices, tips and tricks that I can give you? It's important to have a good idea of the type of requirement workshop ahead of time. Clearly state what you expect from the workshop. What are the deliverables? Don't hesitate to be very visual when facilitating the workshop. You have all the experts in one room or call, so use that as an opportunity to visualize, model, structure requirements as you move forward into the discussion. You will need to do this anyways, so might as well do it now. Make sure that you feel comfortable to run a workshop, especially larger ones with people that you usually don't work with. Also, make sure to limit the meeting to the key stakeholders, so don't invite half the company, as it will make the results of the workshop suboptimal and quite costly. Remember that you are an analyst, not just a scribe or a facilitator, so you also have to actively participate in the exercise. Voila, this concludes the part on workshops. Let's move on now to the next technique. See you there. Bye.